Here to score it for us is John Hofmeister. He's former president of Shell Oil. He's currently with Citizens for Affordable Energy. John, good to see you. Thanks for being here. So let's get right to the worst case scenario. What happens if this thing spreads and Al-Qaeda and Muslim Brotherhood and all the bad guys take over all the oil fields from Saudi Arabia to the United Arab Emirates? What happens then?
I think there's very limited chance that there would be that kind of activity in the major oil-producing countries. I think North Africa, Syria, Jordan are a different case entirely.
Okay, John, just work with me for a second here, though. Let's go with worst case scenario, because this is on people's minds. If that were to happen, and there are some oil sheikhs that are concerned that it might happen, if the bad guys take over the oil fields, what happens to the price of oil? What happens to our lives?
Well, if somehow the Persian Gulf is somehow in that kind of turmoil, you're looking at roughly 20 to 25% of the world's daily supply of oil somehow perhaps being at risk. That would send terror through the three largest economies in the world, the United States, China, and Japan. And Europe would be in even more terror because of the fear of loss of supply. That would be a very serious crisis in which the oil price wouldn't just spike, it would double or even more.
Even though these guys, even the worst guys you can imagine, they still need money. And they've got to sell oil. And it is a competitive market. There are other places besides the Persian Gulf that produce oil, including the United States. So wouldn't they, even the bad guys, wouldn't they be forced by the rules, the laws of supply and demand to sell their oil to us at a competitive price?
Over a period of time, yes, they have to fund their expenses. And oil is their most precious commodity. I'm referring to what would happen in the first instance.
Gotcha.
But over time, it would probably settle out. But nonetheless, it would put the United States economy, the Chinese economy, the Japanese economy at continued risk. So what you would see is a ratcheting up to where $90 oil perhaps is steady state, much, much higher than that, perhaps $150 oil, simply because we don't have alternatives. And the U.S. is the worst example of a country that has faced this kind of insecurity for decades and ends up preventing domestic supplies from being produced.
I know. We talked about that last night. There's no reason for it. Fadl-Gate and other oil experts say within 10 years we could be 100% energy sufficient, 100% independent of those bad guys over there as a result of what we have here, coal, oil, and gas. Nevertheless, let me take your example now. There are Saudi oil sheiks who are worried about what's happening in Egypt happening there. Why are they wrong? Why do you think that this is not going to spread?
Well, I think the conditions that exist in North Africa, where poverty and unemployment are rampant, I think what we have is a much better job of managing economies in Kuwait, in Saudi Arabia in particular. Oman is another good example of good management of economy, good management of the social systems. So people have much more to live for, much more to expect, much more purpose in their life. Iran, I think, is a spent force when it comes to democratization. I think there was such repression a year and a half ago after the last elections that the spirit is just out of the population. And Iraq has its own issues. Iraq is still a very troubled country, still trying to find its footing. And so I just don't see the kind of situation around the Persian Gulf as exists east and north of the Red Sea.
All right. So you're still assuming that our oil supplies are going to be good from the Persian Gulf, from Saudi Arabia, the oil emirates, et cetera, Kuwait. What about the Suez Canal itself? It is a choke point for at least some Mideast oil, right?
I think the next day or two will be determinative of whether either the Mubarak regime does damage to the Suez Canal to blame it on the protesters or the Sumed pipeline, or whether the protesters themselves look for more leverage and do something to the Suez Canal or to the Sumed pipeline. It could go either way. But I think that's more risk in the next couple of days, depending how the political situation unfolds.
And finally, to the point that we touched on, that we dealt with last night, might this crisis not enlighten some people in Congress? You're basically a lobbyist now working for more energy in domestic supply of energy. Might this not shake folks to the core to make them realize we got to open up more right here?
I testified this morning in Congress, in the House Subcommittee on Energy and Power, And there was such divisiveness on the two sides of the committee that I would say that the majority side, the Republican, yes, they are determined, based upon today's testimony, to do something about domestic production. But the Democratic administration, which is strangling the Gulf of Mexico and postponing the 2012 lease round to 2017, shows no interest, and I didn't see any today, in doing something about domestic energy supplies other than the 2035 objective, which the president talked about at the State of the Union.
It's amazing. And it's amazing. When you consider what's happening over there in the Middle East and what might happen to oil, it's just extraordinary. They don't take it more seriously. John Hofmeister, good to see you, sir. Thank you for coming in.
Thank you.
Up